The Big 12 and UConn are in discussions for Huskies to join the Big 12 in football in 2031 and all the sports in 2026, sources told Action Network. And then the next portion of that is that Big 12 presidents must approve, but Commissioner Brett Yormark has been long time a proponent of the Huskies, sources said. UConn officials visited in person with Big 12 ADs in Dallas last week as the school and conference remain in serious expansion negotiations, sources tell Yahoo Sports. All right, this is exciting news because here's a little vision I'm going to give you guys. This is why I'm excited. I've seen this prospect and potential for the Big 12 for the past couple of years and what Brett Yormark has been trying to build out here right now. And I am very, very high and excited for it. I went into a little bit of detail last year, but I'm going to give you guys a full story on this now because here's what I see when I see this. I see that Brett Yormark is trying to turn the Big 12 into a conference that is going to become an international brand. What he's trying to do is build a mega conference, far maybe even bigger than what the SEC is for football, and such a dominant, powerful basketball conference that it becomes a global attraction around the world. That's what I see Brett Yormark trying to build right now in the Big 12. And a lot of people will say, well, what's the benefit towards that? Because in America, a lot of us recognize that, well, in America, football is primarily the dominant sport. Non-negotiable, non-debatable. You're not going to outbeat football in America. So what do you have to do? You have to globalize this branding. And why is that critical? Well, here's some stats I pulled up for you guys that I want people to be able to see. Nielsen Sports Study says this: with almost 3 out of 4 people being interested in basketball in the researched territories, this makes it the second most popular sport globally behind football. This is soccer, obviously. This was also underlined by interest growing from 68% to 74% between 2019 and 2023. Globally, basketball interest is projected at 69% with over 3.3 billion fans aged between 16 and 69. The levels of interest are even higher among 16 to 29-year-olds within the 18 markets, with an incredible 4 out of 5 people below the age of 30 all interested in basketball. This result represents an eye-catching 10% increase since 2019. Countries such as Indonesia, the Philippines, China, and the UAE were all particularly high for this age group, alongside European markets such as Spain, Germany, and Great Britain. All right. So I read these stats to you guys for a reason. This is because a lot of people don't really understand the impact of globalness, right? Because a lot of people are so nationalistic centered on what is going on and booming in America. Rightfully so. You make sense. It's what you're living in. But when you look at it from a business perspective, if you have the opportunity to go global with something, that opens up the revenue and avenues for really infinity. You don't really know. The sky's the limit in that situation. And when you talk about the sport of basketball, basketball is a top 2-3 sport in America. But when you look globally, it is also the top 2 or 3 sport in nearly every country around the world. I say nearly because obviously not specifically that, but a lot of them. And then you get to a country like China, in which it is the most dominated sport, most fan-favorite sport in China. And that is critical to understand because if you can create a product that is entertainable and entertaining to people around the world, this can become a global business. And that's what basketball and college sports is becoming now. And so what I've seen Brett Yormark doing right now is he's trying to build something here. Because opposed to a sport like football, which is American dominant and pretty much irrelevant around the rest of the world, also similar to something like cricket when you see that in India, basketball is truly a global sport. It's a global brand that has opportunities to reach people throughout the world. And you want to ask, well, why do I assume that this is what Brett Yormark is doing? Well, look at what he's trying to schedule. This year, we're going to have Houston playing in Texas, Houston playing Kansas out in Mexico City. And if I'm not mistaken, I couldn't find the exact 2 teams when I was putting this together, but I know there was rumors, maybe I just heard them, that they're going to be looking to play a game in Canada in 2026, if I'm not mistaken. And if we're going there, I wouldn't be surprised to see potentially a European game, a China game, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why I see that Brett Yormark is clearly trying to build an international brand here with the Big 12. Because there's a lot of money potentially going to be involved here. And this is the part that he's having to try to talk into these ADs across the country, and the Big 12, I should say specifically, that when you're talking about building this brand, a lot of them are so football centric. They recognize the power of football in America, and they want to make sure that each of these programs have football. They have this and they have that. Well, let me keep it real with you guys. The Big 12 is not going to be the SEC or the Big 10 for football. It's just not happening. The gap is significant. Now, especially when the ACC falls apart, the Big 12 essentially is number 3. Great positioning. That's huge for you, because if you can be number 3, that would be huge for you, and become far and away the number 1 conference for basketball. That'd be mega. And so what Brett Yormark's going to have to try to do is talk each one of these ADs and boards to make sure they say, okay, I see that. I see the potential for revenue here in the Big 12 for basketball, because we can make this a global aspect, a global brand. And through that, it has a potential to surpass the financial earnings that college football does because of the global stage that basketball has. Now, that is not always something I could say is guaranteed to happen, or I even say it's likely to happen. No, but it's possible. It's certainly possible because of so many eyes you could then bring into the sport, far surpassing what's just been built here in America. So I can tell that that's ideally what Brett Yormark's looking to do right now. And I'm all for that. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think there's a couple years away from this actually happening. So what must the Big 12 do to make this all come to fruition? Well, first of all, what I suggest is that the Big 12 needs to ensure that these ADs get on board with this. The ADs that are currently holding up this UConn process need to give in and let Brett Yormark do his job and get this deal done. They need to stop complaining about the football aspect, buy into what he's building. He's done an incredible job already. I don't think any of us can dispute that. Let him build this thing special in his vision, his plan, and I have a good feeling it's going to work out well. So we got to get them all to buy in. And well, what are they buying into then? Well, here's my new look Big 12, specifically after the ACC blow-up occurs, okay? This is potential, all right? Now, this is going to be a little while, but we're going to discuss, first of all, what we already know. There's 16 teams. They're not going anywhere. Arizona, Arizona State, Baylor, BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, Colorado, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, Utah, and last but not least, West Virginia. All right, so we got 16 teams currently locked in there. Already a loaded basketball conference when you look at history, legacy, coaches, players, potential players, NIL funding, so on and so forth. Big 12 is already the best conference in the country, in my opinion. But how do we make this something that's truly going to be appealing around the globe? Well, step 1, you get this deal done with UConn ASAP. That's first and foremost. It should have already been done. You got to get this deal done soon and quickly. I don't see why it's not done already. Get UConn in this conference. You add that brand, the back-to-back NCAA champions, this really gets spicy out there in the Big 12. We're not done here, though. Just let me get started here. The other part to this now is, all right, so this is the part that does get confusing. I can understand why this will be a dilemma. The other one I would like to see them add is Gonzaga. They shut that down last year in the meetings because they couldn't get behind them because they didn't have football to any extent. Remember, the UConn deal that they're going to bring football in 2031, Gonzaga has no football whatsoever. So you can't bank on them bringing something in the future when you got nothing there yet. So the problem with Gonzaga is that you're going to be lopsided in some way, shape, or form unless you get another team that comes in and does not have another sport. Because in basketball, let's say then when UConn brings in for football, right, then you're going to have one more football than you have for anything else. And Gonzaga wouldn't really make sense for that addition in that situation because they don't have football to evenly match it out then. However, if you bring Gonzaga in, well, then you have lopsided teams for basketball. Now, you could obviously make this work, so it may not be the biggest deal in the world. But if you can add Gonzaga in here, this really gets spicy. That's why I would love to see that happen. However, I'll give a little bit of leeway here. And another team that I would have my eye on for the Big 12 is if Gonzaga does not work out, you want to get a West Coast team. And California would look real nice there. And so what I would suggest is if they can get San Diego State. Remember, they're in this little weird scenario where you have the Mountain West. It's essentially now become, the new high major conference of the West Coast with the Pac-12 disintegrating now. So San Diego State is potentially a team that could move, and they have football. So if you could potentially bring in San Diego State, I would be A-okay with that instead of Gonzaga if that's what they're all worried about. That's a team I'd look at, but preferably I'd have Gonzaga in there. All right, so we got those teams in there. We're essentially, regardless of what that looks like, we're at 18 teams now. Potentially 19 if we get all three, but I don't think that's going to happen. So what do we do then? Well, we look at the ACC. They're currently in litigation problems right now, trying to separate this ACC, headed by Florida State. They're the ones driving this whole thing. When they get out of this deal, it blows up the ACC, similar to what happened in the Pac-12. Now, the ACC will not be disintegrated because they have a lot more depth of teams. They also have a team that's not going to leave the deals. So the ACC is still going to remain intact. They'll just have to add in teams. So it won't be disintegrated, but it's not going to be no high major conference. Let's make that clear. So what do we look at then for potential ACC teams to the Big 12? Well, I'll say two to begin with that I know are not going to happen or likely are not going to happen, but I would have these two instead of some of the teams I'm going to say. That is North Carolina and Miami. We'll love those two to be in the Big 12. Likely it's not happening. It seems that they are bound for the SEC. So when this all goes down, those two should be going over, shifting to the SEC, essentially eliminating the Big 12 from doing that. Now, if you could get North Carolina, Miami in there, absolutely bring them into the Big 12. That would be huge. So they're off the table for me. So who do I want then? Here are my four teams. I want to add in from the SEC, to add in from the ACC, getting the Big 12 to 22 total teams for basketball. I want Duke. I want Syracuse, Louisville, and I want Florida State. I will suggest and say that I'm okay if Florida State is shifted for Virginia for that final spot instead. Not a big fan, but I could also understand Pitt. But Florida State, I like them preferably. But like I said, Virginia, I have no problem with them coming into the Big 12 either. Duke, I mean, you're talking about probably, I'd say Kentucky, Duke have the two biggest global brands currently. They have a lot of players from the teams that have gone out and have international brands that then can go talk about their teams and hype up Duke and Kentucky. So Duke, you're bringing in already a global brand, one of the most recognizable teams in the entire country, and you're adding them into this. Then you bring in Syracuse. We know their history, self-explanatory. Louisville. Here's the thing. I'm very high on what Pat Kelsey's built now in Louisville. I like what they're doing. I think he's going to get them back on track. They would be a team I would like to see back in the Big 12. You get Big 12 funding there. You get them playing in this conference. And if Pat Kelsey's the right coach for this team and gets them back on track, Louisville's a playmaker. They're going to be huge. And that would be a massive brand to have in the Big 12. Florida State, you get another Florida team up and on in there. And that would be massive for them as well. So that's essentially my 22 teams that I'd like to see there. A lot of people are going to look at me right now and say, well, what about the other school that's rumored that we all know about and I'm purposely leaving them out? That's Clemson. I don't want Clemson in the Big 12. It makes zero sense in my opinion. When you talk about Clemson, okay, that has to be essentially based upon the fact that you want them for football. I just talked about we don't need a football. That's not what the Big 12 needs to be done about. It needs to be about basketball. You can have football and be good at it, go put some money into it, all of course. But it needs to be about basketball. And secondly, are you really going to make a team that's not very good at basketball? Overall, they have some decent years here and there, but they're not, you know what I'm saying? They're not Big 12 level. There's obviously a gap between them and these other teams I just listed. Are you going to bring them in just for football when you look at the trash they're putting out there right now? That's not a team that you should be trying to bring in just for football reasons. So I'd have no desire for Clemson. It makes no sense. They're not good there for basketball. And football, it does not look good. It's pretty out there. So no, I don't want Clemson in there. That's just my opinion. I don't want them in there. Here's some stats about what this conference would then be. You would then have 9 of the top 23 winningest programs in college basketball history. You would also have 13 of the 43 winningest programs in college basketball history. And if the flip between Florida State and Virginia happened, then that would make it 14 of the 43 winningest programs in college basketball history. That would all be going down in one conference. You would have matchups of yearly top 5, top 10 teams consistently between Arizona, Kansas, Duke, Syracuse, Houston, etc., etc. And we talk about what's going to happen when we get the share and where people are going to have to start getting paid now. Each one of these Big 12 teams could get a lot of money. You look at a school like Arizona State, I've said many times, they're starting to get going. Hurley's got this team building something now. If they get money out there in Tempe, that's a hot place to get players playing at. A couple of different big prep schools down here in Arizona, close locally. They can recruit a lot of local talent there. You get to live in Tempe, one of the very, very popular destination point. They could get booming out there in Arizona State. You've got a lot of teams here that have history, that have talent, and this would be how you build an international brand of a lot of guys that essentially would be a preparatory for the NBA then, because this conference would be pushing countless NBA guys year in and year out over and over and over again. So that is why I am super high on this. This UConn deal better get done ASAP. I don't know what the holdup is. I know what the holdup is, but I don't know who is holding it up, and I don't know why, because it's ridiculous. So what needs to happen is they need to get this UConn deal done. Let the ACC thing happen. I understand that's something they can't negotiate yet. It has to be drawn out over a period of time. The litigation needs to be over with. Once that process is done, the floodgates open. Go get them. And then secondly, obviously, or thirdly, you have to go work on getting that other team. If it's going to be possibly two in Gonzaga and San Diego State, like I said, that's not going to probably work. But if you can get Gonzaga, that's your number one option. Number two option is getting San Diego State. And that, my friends, would likely form what I believe could be an international brand and potentially rival the earnings of a predominantly football conference in America if you do make that an international brand. Regardless of what it is, I will give massive props. Brett Yormark, he is the real deal. That guy knows how to build something special. He's had a great track record before he even took over in the Big 12, and he's continued to build upon that throughout his career so far in the Big 12. He is sensational what he's done and built out there. So that's what I hope occurs in the Big 12, and I truly do have a lot of excitement for what could possibly happen in the next few months or years to the Big 12.